Firstborn. Forward, brothers! The traitors await, the Iron Thane bellowed as the iron hands advanced. Rain poured down in gusting sheets, hammering against ceramite plates and pooling in the mud below. The sky was cloaked in thick, iron-gray clouds, obscuring the sun and mixing with the black plumes of smoke rising from the shattered city behind the defensive line. The heresy was in its third year, 3 years of blood and betrayal. The legions were left to bleed out across the stars while the Emperor retreated to Terra, locked away in his sanctum, building his great design. They whispered that he lounged on his throne, feasting on grapes and ancient songs while his firstborn sons died in his name. Bitterness festered, and the whispers grew into shouts of rebellion. But this battle was personal. Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, had led his sons into the fires of Isstvan V. There, on that blackened world, Manus sought to break the traitors, but fate dealt another hand. Fulgrim, his once brother, cut him down, the Phoenician's blade severing the head of the Iron Hand's soul. In that moment, the legion shattered, fractured into bitter warbands, fighting private wars of vengeance against the Emperor's children. The 7th Iron Hands Company had waged its own bloody campaign until the Iron Thane, his authority tenuous at best, recalled them. He gathered what remained of the scattered clans, welding them into a force driven more by hate and necessity than loyalty. The 7th's praetor followed, not out of reverence, but habit. Cadon marched alongside his brothers, boots sinking into the mire with each step. In the distance, the 15th Company had already engaged the heretics, their black Mark III plates slogging through the mud, bolters barking at the dug-in Emperor's children. The battlefield was scarred and cratered, pillboxes jutting like jagged teeth from the earth, forming a labyrinth of killing zones. Cadon was of the 7th. His brothers were tasked with reinforcing captured positions, clearing tunnels and trench networks once the battle had already been won. Glory, it seemed, was reserved for the 15th. They would plant the banner of victory while the 7th buried their dead in unmarked graves. His praetor stood atop the ridge, motionless as the rain slicked off his black armor. The trench fire, curiously, did not sweep toward the 7th. The heretics focused their fury on the 15th below. Cadon shifted, the weight of the fleet voxcaster pressing down on his back. He stood by his captain, listening to the static hum of incoming orders. Beneath the ridge, the 15th crawled forward, thousands of iron hands inching through the mire. Shells screamed overhead, detonating in bursts of flame and soil. Even from this distance, the thunderous barrage rattled Cadon's bones. The Vox sputtered to life. Lament of Desire in position, came the cold voice of the shipmaster. Cadon glanced skyward. Through the clouds he glimpsed it, a predatory shape drifting silently like a void shark. The battleship loomed, its silhouette outlined by distant lightning. Cadon allowed himself a rare smile. He stepped forward, gripping the praetor's pauldron. "In position, Lord," he said, barely containing his eagerness. The praetor's green eye lenses flickered in the dim light. Slowly his gaze lowered to the battlefield, to the 15th, thousands of his brothers advancing beneath him. Then he turned to the 7th, 900 iron hands standing ready. A figure clawed his way up the hill. A consul of the 15th, his crimson plume matted with mud and rain, crested the ridge, panting heavily. "Why aren't you supporting, you dogs?" The consul snarled, his voice edged with fury. The praetor answered with a plasma pistol. The weapon barked, a searing bolt, punching through the consul's chest plate, slagging his ribcage in an instant. Smoke coiled from the hole as the consul crumpled backward, the rain hissing against molten ceramite. Without lowering his weapon, the praetor raised his blade. "Now!" Cadon's voice split the air. "Now!" The sky wept fire. The clouds ignited in flashes of violet and crimson as plasma bolts rained from orbit. The Lament of Desire unleashed her payload, hammering the battlefield with the wrath of the void. The bombardment descended in waves, each blast swallowing squads whole, armor liquefying beneath the fury of starfire. The 15th had no warning. Cadon watched as the line disintegrated, iron hands reduced to blackened husks. The pillboxes, once obstacles, became tombs as the orbital bombardment collapsed them inward. The screams of the dying, though distant, were unmistakable. When the fires faded and the rain resumed its mournful fall, nothing remained but scorched earth and molten craters. The praetor lowered his blade. As one, the 7th opened fire, gunning down the surviving stragglers of the 15th Company as they crawled back up the hill. Cadon raised his bolter, sighting an iron hand, dragging himself through the mud. The shells tore through his brother's armor, ripping chunks from the pauldron and chest plate. The loyalist collapsed, and Cadon heard himself cheer. After 3 long years of hopelessness, they had purpose. The Imperium would be rebuilt, not by the highborn traitors cowering atop the hierarchy, but by those forged in battle. The Legion would rise anew for the future of mankind. Together, the 7th had declared for the War Master. The praetor surged forward, blade extended. Cadon followed, splashing through the field of corpses. The bodies of his brothers were indistinguishable from the heretics they had fought, and now stood beside. Behind them, his captain urged the rest of the company onward, but Cadon realized he was alone with the praetor. Ahead, the praetor struck down another iron hand. The loyalist fell, his face twisted in shock as if the betrayal had killed him rather than the blade. There would be no glory today, but there would be vengeance. Breaking through the lines, Cadon saw the Iron Thane. His armor was marred by gunfire and caked in mud, swinging his axe in wide arcs at an Emperor's Children warrior, leaving red gashes across purple plate. The Iron Thane turned, gesturing angrily. "That damn shipmaster! I'll have him flogged! Can't he see straight?" His voice thundered over the battlefield, his gauntleted hand gesturing to the bodies of his men strewn around him. The praetor reached him silently. Without a word, he drove his blade through the Thane's chest. The Iron Thane staggered, gripping his stomach as blood pooled from the wound. He sank to his knees, staring down in disbelief. Cadon watched, the battlefield tilting as if the world spun beneath him. "The Thane!" Voices echoed from below. 3 iron hands, their armor marked with the sigil of the 15th, rushed to their fallen leader's side. Feeling hollow, Cadon raised his bolter and fired. One fell, but return fire slammed into his leg, knocking him to the ground. Before he could rise, 2 of the iron hands were upon him, their combat blades hacking down against his armor. The blade edges screeched against ceramite. The praetor grappled with the others. One fell, crushed in the praetor's power fist, while the other reeled back, a smoking hole in his helm from his plasma pistol. Cadon crawled through the mud, bolter lost in the melee. Nearby, the shattered body of an Emperor's Children captain lay sprawled, his ornate armor scarred by gunfire. In his grip was a long, rusted blade, decayed, its edge pitted with corrosion. He almost did not bother looking for a rock or iron bar or rock. "Take the blade," a voice said in his head. He looked around. It was a woman's voice, calm and quiet, but with an insistence. Above the smell of blood, mud, and cordite, he smelt perfume, sickly sweet. Did he have concussion? Then another smell, one more familiar from his home world, sulfur. "Yes, that blade, the one in front of you, take it," said the voice. It was not through his vox. He felt a sharp pain as a combat blade pierced his armor. He shouted. He had no pistol. He had lost it a year ago. "The blade," said the voice again. "Take the damn sword." Was his mind talking to him? No matter, the weapon was the only one to hand. With no other choice, Cadon reached out and wrenched it free. "Finally," said the voice, exasperated. As the iron hand raised his blade to finish him, Cadon pulled the discarded sword in and thrust upwards. The rusted weapon slid through ceramite as if it were parchment. The iron hand collapsed, lifeless. Cadon blinked. The blade hummed faintly in his grip. Another warrior lunged, and Cadon struck again. The corroded blade sliced cleanly through his opponent's armor, carving through his midsection. He knelt, holding the weapon in his hands, confused. When he looked up, the praetor stood over the Iron Thane. With a final, measured swing, he severed the Thane's head. Cadon pulled himself to his feet, bolter gone, the strange blade still humming in his hand. He adjusted the broken voxcaster on his shoulder, but it spat only static. Through the rain, the rest of the 7th emerged, mud clinging to their greaves, blood washing away in rivulets. The praetor placed a heavy hand on Cadon's pauldron, nodding in silent thanks. His gaze lowered to the blade in Cadon's grasp. The rust clung unnaturally to the weapon, but despite its worn appearance, it radiated power. "A never-born weapon," the praetor mused. "You have been blessed in your first battle as a heretic." Cadon stared down at the blade, his mind swimming with doubt. He had wielded power swords before, but this was different. No ordinary blade cut like this. It could only be of the warp. Had he just been talked to by a Neverborn? If so, it had not been what he had expected. "You bastards." Both turned toward the voice. From the wreckage of a bunker staggered an Emperor's Children praetor, his purple armor resplendent despite the battle. Gilded filigree curled across his chest plate, and the hem of his cloak dragged in the mud. "You were supposed to bombard your own men, not mine," he snarled, pointing along the trench line. "Are your ship captains blind?" His polished armor glimmered beneath the rain, far too clean for a man who had stood in the thick of the fight. He looked around. Iron Hands replaced so many of their body parts with mechanical junk. "You are no better than servitors." The two Iron Hands looked back at the Emperor's Children, praetor, saying nothing. The purple and gold praetor approached them, then slapped the Iron Hands praetor across the helm with an impact that dislodged his vox beak. "I am going to have you all flogged for this, you incompetent cog-headed post-servitor dogs," he swore. The Iron Hands officer touched his broken helm, saying nothing. Kadon felt the daemon blade shake in his hand. He rammed it into the Emperor's Children Marine, who fell to his knees, then fell into the mud. "Oh, we are going to get along great," said the voice. Kadon ignored it, mag-locking his new weapon.